Let's start recording. And yes, absolutely. This session is going to be recorded and it will be posted at coachingagilejourneys.com. If Shrikant has joined yet, I'm not sure, but we are collaborating with Shrikant from Agile Commune, so it'll probably be posted wherever he posts stuff also. And so I'm so excited today to welcome Jeff Koors. And Jeff Koors is, of course, a co-host at Coaching Agile Journeys as well, but we're doing this in collaboration with Agile Commune and Agile Orlando also, where this was posted. So welcome everybody from Agile Orlando. And those of you who found it through Agile Commune, we are so happy to do this event at a time when you could join as well. And of course, great bonus session for Coaching Agile Journeys before the end of the year, which we wanted to get in too. So talk about coaching Agile Journeys. Who are we? And we've grown so much this year. And you'll probably see us live tweeting out a graphic before the end of the year about all the awesome things that we did. We have had about 14, I think it's 14 meetups this year, and our attendance has grown by 10 times in the past year. So we're so excited. And we now had to add more hosts. So it's Isaac Garcia, who will give a little wave. Jeff Koors, of course, who's our presenter today, myself, Lori Townsend, and Mark Kruth, who I don't think could make it today. And Shrikant, I don't think Shrikant is on here yet, but he will wave when he gets on. So we're just a group of people who are passionate about Agile, and we wanted to have more people know about more things in Agile. And it started out, and I went to a conference, and I missed one of the speakers because I was presenting myself, and I was like, oh, how sad. Would you do a webinar for us? And he's like, yeah, I would. So it kind of grew from there, and I went and found more and more people who were doing speaking events and webinars and wanted to help us out. So everybody is entirely a volunteer initiative. And you can see all our past stuff at coachingagilejourneys.com. And we recently got a sponsor, ScrumDo, and ScrumDo is a really awesome tool as well. So it's not as well known as LeanKit or some of the other ones, but it actually has support for SAFe, and it has portfolio level Kanban boards. So in other tools like Jira, you have to pay extra for the portfolio level support. And ScrumDo has it here with a Slack integration and a lot of other stuff. So if you haven't checked it out yet, I encourage you to check out ScrumDo as a tool, which is really cool. So I think I am going to stop sharing my screen and get it on with it because it's 4 past, and I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Sweet. All right. Now if I can figure out how to share my screen, we'll be good to go.
Click the green button on the bottom.
Oh, I see. Thank you. See, I didn't even play with the tools. Let's see. Let's look at Finder. Let's share screen. It should be my screen, right? So can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Direction. Can you see?
We can see your screen. It's got the applications up there, but not the presentation.
Oh, really? Okay. Let's try this again. So there. Got it now. Coming right up, my friends.
Awesome.
All right.
That looks about right.
By the way, guys, I started out with this because it's cold here in Florida, right? It's not really beaches and palm trees today. There was ice on the ground when I woke up. So fun stuff. Anyway, that's my Florida user experience. Anyway, I'm going to dig into why user experience can be a front seat driver in Agile delivery, and hopefully you learn a thing or two. Does anybody know that guy that's with me? I'm the big ugly guy that's there with the big blue shirt on. That's at CBS Sports. But that's Kenny Rubin. I don't know if anybody's ever got to meet Kenny Rubin, but he's an awesome guy, like world class. And you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. Hit me up anytime. But I have a fine arts background, believe it or not, and I was just started off by saying I was really passionate. And I went to meet some former executives from that did a 3-day workshop on user experience in New York, and learned so much that it opened up my eyes to what the world really is about in IT technology, and how you think just because you have one of the best products on the market, that may not be the case, and that you could always do things better. And I really got to thinking, does anybody here ever think, man, what are we building this for? Because in Agile, you hear code, 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 test, test, test. but sometimes you don't stop to smell the roses, right? And go, okay, what's this thing that I'm building? What problem are we trying to solve? And are we really delivering the most value? And sometimes just because you think you're delivering value doesn't still mean that you're hitting what the end user wants, right? The end user drives the world. It drives the marketplace. And to think you're going into a thing with Amazon where I'm in a workshop with the people that have it. Oh, someone's talking there. Hey, if you could mute real quick. So, you know, Amazon does it one of the best in the world. And we were talking about it. They're trying to drone you stuff to your house, and their user experience has come a long way. And the faster and the more they learn and the more AI they have, the better they're trying to, you know, reach you. And you think about all the apps that you use all the time, and this is just a sampling of what I'm sure, I don't know what our audience share right now is. It could be 500. And I bet of the 500, all 500 would have at least one of these apps that they use, or they're, you know, I love that app, you know, and think about a reason why you love that app, a reason why you're so adopted to it or ingrained with it. The first thing that comes to mind isn't, well, some developer worked really hard on it, so that's why I'm using it, right? It's sticky. And that's back at CBS Interactive, man. Our SVP, he was really gung-ho and competitive, and he said, we just want to create sticky environments. We want to make them, you know, as highly adoptable as they could be, and we want people to keep coming back. And here are some things that just make people come back. It makes your life easier. Easy to use, very intuitive. And I say this today, when you think about projects in terms of products and a big bang release, which I'll get to in a minute, you don't want to have a whole training course just for somebody to use your product. You've missed the mark. Serves a purpose or a need. Every one of those apps that I showed you, if I dip back, there's a particular purpose. I mean, look at Google. The second you bring it up, they don't have to have anything on screen. They just have a search box. It's as simple as can be. Right away, you get it. You know what they're after. They're a search engine. But I mean, now they're into everything with Pixel and phone and you name it. Google's into everything. But when you go to their site, you know what they're about. It saves you time. Think about how many apps, you know, like a mapping app, for instance, you have to go someplace. Remember those old atlases, and you'd fold them out and they were everywhere and you had to pull off to the side of the road and read them. Well, think about today. You just basically say, speak into your phone. I want to go here. All right, we're going to not only map you, but we're going to tell you how to get around traffic, right? Readily informative. I don't know if most of you are of the Gen X plus group, but we had to use Encyclopedia Britannicas and go to libraries at one point in time. So think about how easy life is today, right? This is user experience stuff. This isn't just somebody banging out code. This is thinking like a user. It's fun. I'm going to jump with fun and multiply it by that excitement hype thing at the bottom. Does anybody remember the Pokemon Go release? There was so much buzz about that. They had to create laws. People were wrecking cars. People were walking and trespassing on other people's property. I mean, it was a buzz. It was in the news everywhere. Everyone wanted to try it. I had zero experience with Pokemon Go, and I find I'm doing this now with my kids when it came out, you know. But it was a buzz. It was hype. It was user experience, man. And then business or profit reasons. Some people get into it because they found a niche in the market and they're going to make money off of it. And other people use it much like I would with like Concur. I use Concur for business trip booking, and it makes life easy. I remember the days I had to manually put everything into an expense report. And basically something like Concur tracks me, and I can take pictures of my receipts. And then as soon as my trip's over, I just hit submit. So apps becoming irrelevant. You always got to hit the converse, and you always got to think, what are the things that mess up my user experience, or why would I not want to use this? Doesn't offer anything helpful. You know, sometimes you probably feel like that in your day-to-day grind. Like, how's this going to help our end user? You know, did not evolve to continue to meet today's user demands or needs. I was just talking about MySpace and how it didn't evolve, and Facebook came out. Well, guess what? MySpace is going back to evolving. It's becoming like a music scene place. It's not dead. It's still out there, but Facebook just overcame it. And in order to keep up with competition, you got to evolve and listen to your customers. Listen to the end users, more importantly. Not easy to use. How many people are like, wow, I need a training course on this. I can't figure it out. This is horrible. Too many bugs, crashes, or issues. That's where the development side comes into play. It's very important to keep track of that. Development's huge. Too complex. Like, I got to click 5 times to get what I need. This is horrible. I could surface this information better. One of the things I brought up to CA Agile just recently, they have this really cool feature called Custom List View, and it's basically a search of anything in their database, but it's buried so far on this custom app thing. I said, you should really, I mean, if that's the meat and potatoes of your product and every salesperson in your company is using this, you should bring it to the front and center. Like, everybody should be using this. Not very pleasing. You get that ugly thing with these really off colors. Like, I created something like that the other day when I wrote a blog on LinkedIn, and it's really ugly graphic, but I kind of did it with a reverse idea of maybe you notice that really ugly graphic and want to find out what it's all about. Outdated or bad data. Like, what if you use that map? What if you use the mapping program and it took you down the wrong street or put you in the wrong part of the, like an inner city where it's like really dangerous, and you're like, how did I get here? I'm going to need an army to get me out of here. You'd never use that product again. Slow performance, not fast. We had a partner back at one of the companies I worked with, and I don't know what's wrong with their page loading time, but I said, here it is. I use this product pretty frequently, and now I'm using the competitor's product because it's just terrible. We need to fix this. Disturbing ads. I came from a newspaper background industry, and they've always tried to go through a transformation and try to evolve, going back up to the evolving to meet today's demands. And they're trying to figure out how to shoehorn advertising dollars into the world of digital media, because that's their business model. That's their finance model. So what did they do? They took their media site, like a newspaper site, OrlandoSentinel.com. You can't even read an ad, read an article. You just keep having these ads like pop up in your face, and you keep closing out of them. And it's so bad. I won't ever go to their site ever again to read an article. I'd rather just get it organically in my Facebook stream. Lengthy forms. Ever go someplace and it's like, wow, man, we could have intelligent forms. Why do I have to fill this out? It's so redundant. You could run a Google on me and find out where I live. I mean, it's kind of crazy. And I'm trying not to give anyone any ideas, by the way. But so anyway, I think the great Albert Einstein said we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. That's evolutionary. So at the time that we created something, certain problems may have existed, but they're going to surface themselves later down the road. Here's a really good thing. I was back in Agile Orlando, where I actually met Heidi in person 2 years ago, which was kind of 2 years ago. And I actually went, it was open space technology, and I went to this thing, this session, and it was called Microchips in Brain, the very first one that I have here. And the whole concept was, would you be willing to put a microchip in your brain? And what's funny is we think this is kind of like a joke, or what it turned into a user experience conversation of like wearables, Google Glass, touch surfaces. I have a brother that works in the medical industry, and he's a patent attorney, and they're working on AI-driven robotic surgeries. They could take a guy that's an orthopedics genius like Dr. James Andrews, record 1,000 of his movements on an ACL surgery, and eventually start having a robot do it with a lot more precision than what Dr. James Andrews can. I mean, where's the world going? So to think microchips in brain is impossible. This is stuff that didn't exist 2 years ago when I met Heidi, big data everywhere. This is a huge thing. That's all they're talking about now is big data. Voice recognition, artificial intelligence. I mentioned that. My son, all he wants for Christmas is Alexa. Alexa, please play me this rap song or whatever. Like he has everything that I thought would be the Jetsons back when I was a kid. Augmented, virtual, and hologram reality. This is really cool. I was out in Vegas, and I went to watch Michael Jackson 1 in Vegas. And there was hologram reality. Michael Jackson, I kid you not, was in front of me. It was him. They could bring back people that are deceased and put them on stage. This is today. This isn't like what's 10 years from now. This is today. Machines that think for you, like everything connected through the cloud. And then, of course, like that image you see, will we even need a computer? I was talking with one of the doctors that just did my bicep tendon surgery, and he was showing me how messed up his queuing system is in the office once he found out I was into tech and into Agile and thinking through user experience. And I was talking to him about augmented 3D hologram reality nurses that he could put a headset on and they could prompt him and give him an update on the patient before he even goes into the room. And before he exits the room, they could say, Dr. Jefferson, your next patient's in room 3. This is the patient. This is their medical history. This is the prescriptions they're on. And he could walk in with far more knowledge with a 3D or hologram download of exactly what he needs to know. I mean, this is going to happen. He goes, you know what, man? He goes, that'd be cool for the doctor when the surgeon's sick, because he's the PA. He goes, he could pipe in at home and not get anyone sick. I was like, that's cool. And then he looks at me and he goes, do you know anything about beer yoga? So he wants me to go to the microbrew and do beer yoga with him.
That's funny.
We could talk more about this doing beer yoga. And I said, that sounds awesome. So anyway, here's just a view of 2020, right? So this isn't very far off, just a couple years. This is the projection of Internet of Things. 4 billion connected people. I mean, I challenge you this, and somebody else once challenged me, try to count to 1 million. I'll bet you can't finish it by the end of 2018. This is 4 billion. Now we leap to the trillions in revenue opportunity, $4 trillion. I don't even know if there's a trillionaire in this world. 25 million apps. I mean, how are you competing with that? 25 billion embedded intelligence systems. That's out of this world. And 50 trillion gigabytes of data. That is insanity. I call it an internet overloaded with things. I mean, you could get lost in the shuffle real quick. So we look at 100 years. This is a snapshot. This is a really cool infographic that I found circulating around on LinkedIn. And I said, man, this is something. Look at the industrial era, the industrial revolution there in 1917. There's no tech sector space on the market. Fast forward 50 years, IBM's made its way to the top. Now look at 2017. And you think companies that aren't even tech sector based companies. I'm working at one right now that's healthcare based. My brother's there at Johnson & Johnson, which is green. And I went and did a stint with a local energy company, and they're talking about internet technology and information technology and technology in general. So even if you're not a tech-based company, you're becoming one, so you really got to start thinking like the end user. And then here's just another quick thing. 469,445 Facebook likes a minute. 24 million plus emails sent a minute. Amazon, like I said, processes $3,400 worth of transactions a minute. What if you could have 1% of that? That'd be cool. 28,000 plus Instagram likes, 54,000 plus Google searches, and over 7,000 tweets. If your mind hasn't exploded yet to what the internet's become and what end user volumes are like, this is it. And the backbone to it is good quality agile development, but the foreground to it is how do we connect with these users? If there's that much competition, things are moving this fast, how do we get to them? How do we get feedback, and how do we get them to adopt us or become sticky, no matter what business we're in? So modern tech, it's all about products and features. Products must evolve. I told you that was a killer to adoption. You just don't evolve, or you don't evolve fast enough. Focus on the next generation. I mean, how many of you, you could all raise your hand, are sick of hearing millennials? Guess what? Gen Z's right behind them, and there's another generation right behind them. And if you're thinking for the millennials, you missed it, because the millennials are driving business right now. They're moving in, starting to think, what Generation Z? So if you're thinking millennial, you're working yourself out of a position. Competitors advancing technology like the space race. Remember, the space race was a big thing way back in the 60s and 50s and 70s. And now technology, it's a race to technology. Who could be bigger, badder, and better? Who can make people's lives easier? And their visions are awesome. Like, I want to connect the world. I want to create commercial space travel. It's pretty cool stuff. Users give feedback. Feedback comes back into development, and iteration occurs. So I think you remember I started this off with user experience drives agile development. Isn't it about feedback loops and basically hearing what the end users want, and then coming back and making their lives easier, making the product better so that they never leave your ecosystem? Using empirical data and user behavior. That's huge. I mean, how many people today work and you're like, why are we developing this? Whose idea is this? Well, use empirical data and say, hey, look, this is what we're getting. This is what people want. Ultimately, how do we make life better for you? That's what it's all about, right? Everything that I use in some way is a replication of how my life can become easier, better, how it could communicate better, and how the world's advancing, really. So one of the things that I do with my teams and with people to level set is we can't move any further until we know what the definition is. So user experience, as defined, is overall experience of a person using a product such as a website or a computer application, especially in terms of how easy or pleasing it is to use. That goes hand in hand with everything I was saying about why it was adopted. So this came out of Google's dictionary. So the second part of their definition is, if a website or an app degrades the user experience too much, people will simply stay away. And that goes to that other slide that I said, why do people end up working themselves away or never using your product or your numbers in terms of page metrics or exit rate or declining? Well, I mean, you might have a user experience problem. So now the meat and potatoes of this, and basically where I started this, I was asked to give a keynote and speak to FinTank Miami a good while ago, and it was a user experience hackathon, and I did some really great things with user experience groups and injecting user experience into Agile back in like 2012, 2013, which seems like an eternity. But don't get caught up in that. That's the lean UX. That's a very busy diagram right there. I think it might be over complex, but lean UX is really great, and I'll get into that in a minute. So I usually say 3 things to take into consideration. Effort to produce a visual illustration. Like, how much visual supplementation do we need to get started? Maturity assessment. How mature are we as orgs, individuals, as a team, and as people? And then what approach will fit best once questions 1 and 2 are answered, and where can we start from to make things happen fast? So I don't know if you guys get confused with the nomenclature that's out there. I'm going to back up to some blocking and tackling. But wireframes, sketches, mock-ups, prototypes, and a working prototype are all different. And it's good as product people, Scrum Masters, and Agilists to be cognizant of that, and cognizant of the type of fidelity and the type of visual supplementation you need. So this is a wireframe. You know, you have something like really cool like Balsamiq that you could get to a wireframe real quick. Some teams, they'll get together in a room and they'll wireframe something out. And I mean, here's 2 visual illustrations. And you get it. there's Wikipedia right there, right? You get the layout, you get where things are going. And some developers are like, I got it. And they could already start building div containers, building link boxes. You're gonna hash through the styles later, right? But you could already start working if you think about it. Sketches. I have a fine arts degree and background. Not everybody can make cool sketches like this, but a lot of designers and UX designers. I have a friend that's up in Atlanta right now, and I worked with a few years ago. He's an awesome artist, and we could sketch things out like this real quick. And you almost get more from this visually than what you did from the wireframe, but you could do this on a napkin, right? You could do it on a whiteboard, and you kind of get where it's going. You're almost like at a prototype with this one image down here where it says 1, 2, 3, 4 with a sketch, something that could be done in 10 minutes. Important. Sketches are not prototypes. Sketch early, right? This is an ideation process. User experience and discovery is a process that happens. Sketches are disposable. You're not really committed to anything. You're exploring. It's uncertain. Collaboration. It's the heart of Agile. Let's collaborate. Let's talk about this stuff. The more fidelity you get, and the later you get, and the more detail you put into prototyping, the less disposable it becomes. The more finite it becomes, the more certain it becomes, and the more people stick with that, almost like it was a plan, right? I think there's rapid application development, and they believe in prototyping fast and getting something into the hands of the end user. But I think the speed comes in low fidelity prototyping, which we'll get in a minute, not trying to think through every pixel. I call it pixel Picasso, right? A lot of art. I'm an artist myself, right? So one of the things that I say a true artist work's never done. You always look at your own art and go, I could add more color here, or I could add more composition here. And the same goes for user experience artists a lot of times. And I'll get into that in a minute with the maturity model. But low fidelity mocks, as you could see, this is really visually pleasing. You're kind of getting the color scheme. You understand where things lay in terms of wireframing, but you could get to this real quick and you could pass it to somebody and then start collaborating from there. Now, high fidelity mock, I used two of the places that I worked in the past, not because I'm using them as bad examples, not that they did this at all, but I did see, like in sales, Mazda, you produce this Mazda drop-down ad, and you go back to Mazda, and you're like, here's a mock-up. Well, if you change anything else on that page other than that ad, what happens? The business people, Mazda's like, wait a minute, that's not what I signed off on. It's so certain. And you're painting someone a picture of it's going to look one for one that you may be selling them a false vision. Same with Availity. You look at all the wording on the screen, and that wording may be critical in terms of user experience. Now, say you work with marketing and they go, we think we could change the wording and make it a little bit better. Now, those same executives that signed off on it are going, that's not what I agreed to. It's not very agile. So we've got to watch with the high fidelity mocks. Low fidelity prototypes, these are really cool, really easy to get to. This is the type of functionality you want. You can get this into the hands of end users in terms of a focus group, start getting feedback, and then you can make it pretty later. And you can get this done real quick, in a couple days. I'll get to methodologies and how to inject this real soon. High fidelity prototypes, unless you're doing RAD or unless you plan on salvaging some of the CSS or some of the imaging or artwork, this could take you weeks, if not months, if not many, many months to get to something like that. You don't even have anything developed. So high fidelity prototypes look great, but there's a whole lot of stuff that could go to waste there. If you think lean, you've done wasted a lot of time. But in some orgs, that's what they need. So what's the difference between the high fidelity prototype and the working prototype? High fidelity prototype you could do in something like Adobe XD, Sketch 3. The working prototypes, literally when you sit down with a software engineer, React developer, and you basically put some code to it and you're building out a front-end process or a front-end system, but it's not connected to a database. You're using mock data, so you're doing mock service calls. But what you have is vaporware. You have something that you may have spent a lot of time on, you may have put a lot of engineering effort into it, and it's nothing more than vaporware. This could work for you if you use all of that code that you use to develop the front end, but it could work against you if you've 8 months into this and you've spent about $7 million and you decide that what you have is irrelevant and no end user has ever really seen this thing. So steer clear of the vaporware and be very, very cautious of the amount of, fidelity or effort that you put into creating a visual effort on the front end. I could share this deck out. Here's a real quick ideate, detailize, visualize, and then interact. It's kind of a cool little graph that I found, infograph. So the maturity assessment, right? So one, you see the different levels of visual effort that you can need, but that goes hand in hand with the level of maturity your org is, the level of maturity your team is, and the level of maturity that you have in terms of independent role players. They all come into effect. So love office space. We're getting away from that whole office space concept, and actually they pointed out in what do you call it? The Agile Manifesto to history about getting away from that Dilbert-esque mindset. So, you got to look at your team composition. And Kenny Rubin, that I showed you way back at the beginning, he was very big on feature-based teams, not component-based teams. So I don't have just a team of front-end developers and a team of back-end developers, but I have a very good cross-functional team. I'm sure everyone has experienced the dogma, the politics, the fiefdoms, the bureaucracy. I've worked my way all the way up to the VP level, and you're going to ask me for permission for everything, and I'm going to protect my position. This is my nest egg, the golden parachute policy, or you have to ask someone for permission, or you have to get my approval before you build this. And there's not much trust in those type of systems. And that could be holding you back from development in terms of where we go with deciding what Agile approach in terms of UX we need to get to. Big project, big release, big bang mindset. How quick can we get things out? Iron triangle, fixed scope, fixed budget, fixed resources, fixed everything, Functional management, Agile support. How many people get into it where the team really wants to be Agile? The UX staff really want to be Agile. Everybody wants to be Agile, but then you have some detractor that's at functional management not believing in the trust system, right? Hierarchical management in layers. You have to have 5 sign-offs, a lot of red tape before you can move forward. You're never going to have the best user experience when you have to wait for that many sign-offs. And in sales and marketing, Agile maturity. Who I work for now is Matrix, and they do a real cool thing, and it says holistic Agile, and that's bringing Agile into your HR. Think about it. If you could hire the right Agilist to put in a position that have the right skill sets. Sales, you get them to understand that this is just a mock-up. Your ad is placement only. That's really what it is, and this is how we operate in marketing. This is how, we're going to make changes, and we're going to make them iteratively, and we're going to do A/B studies, and we're going to find out what the best verbiage is to use. Think about Agile teams. Think about the most high-performing teams. They call Navy SEALs Tier 1 operators. Wouldn't it be awesome if our Agile teams were Tier 1 operators? How mature can your Agile team be? Navy SEALs are small. They keep them very small. The communication channels are really small. They train them all the time. They constantly walk through practices, and they're very agile. They have, they can adapt and overcome. That's their thing. That's what they say. We adapt and we overcome. So is your UX designer and UX management that way, or are they after Pixel Picasso? So like, no, we can't unveil this yet. We're not ready, or we can't share this with anybody because it's not quite refined. Or are they very collaborative in nature, collaboratists? They like, hey, can we get the development team to talk about this? Or, hey, can we show this to an end user somewhere and get them to take a look so we can get feedback? Hey, can we go and talk to our call center and get some feedback from our call center and find out what real end users' pain points are? Development team, a lot of times you probably worked with development teams where they're like, no, we can't work on this. We don't have enough detail, and we can't really, this wireframe just isn't doing it for us. We're afraid to make mistakes on this because the wireframe isn't giving us the visual indication. We need graphic slices. A product owner that's like, hey, wait a minute, I can't get approval on this. I need it to look exactly like we're going to deliver it in terms of a mock-up before we can start writing user stories and get the development team working on it. And a scrum master, does the scrum master help facilitate that collaboration, help get them to try new things and experiment and get them moving faster instead of later? And then what's your chemistry like when you put it all together? That's a big thing. If you have interpersonal conflict on a team, it's like a team cancer. It'll start destroying the team. It doesn't matter what you do user experience wise. It won't come out looking like what you really want it to. You're just going to be basically mitigating that lack of chemistry on a team. So it's very optimistic to get them working together really well. So here's another infographic that I built on, and you can see in the center there at the very bottom, very mature agile teams, and your concept and fidelity at the left, very low fidelity and still ideating. There's not a whole lot of certainty. So you're gathering details, but a very mature team, once sketches, wireframes, and discussion starts to happen, they can start making things come to life. That's the value of having good, mature agile teams and a good, mature org. Your average teams need low fidelity mocks, or they'll need some sort of high fidelity mock-up. They'll need really, really sharp user stories, and in some cases, some sort of a prototype to show them how it works so that they get the, if I click this, then what happens going on. Now, your least mature, your very mature teams have already delivered something before your least mature teams, orgs, and people could even operate. They need certainty, lots and lots of certainty, and they're going to build against that certainty. So you can't really inject a whole lot of good user experience momentum there. You actually have to deliver them the whole entire ecosystem and show them here's everything, So keep that in mind, because ultimately you want to move the needle to the far left and start working as early as you can. Sketches, wireframes, diagram, and agility is about that collaboration. It's about people over process. So here's the biggest trap that I could think of. This happens everywhere. I'm sure however many people are on right now, it's plaguing you, is there's always somebody internally that knows exactly what to build for the end users. You put it to work, you build it for 9, 10 months, maybe even a year and a half. And then you release it, and it's like a bomb went off. Feedback starts coming in. This doesn't work for us. Think how much waste. I mean, start thinking lean. Like, we over-processed some other person's idea over getting, good empirical data and good user feedback. So here's how to avoid that. So here's some good tricks to avoid that. MVP, minimal viable product. Often overlooked, and usually most people's MVP is the most viable product, meaning we want everything in it. Prototype quickly, low fidelity, get it to the user, use that rad thinking, get something to the user, even if it's in the form of a focus group. Questionnaires, just put out questionnaires. I've seen some really good questionnaires. Pilot programs, beta releases, internal alpha testing. Back when I was at CBS Sports, we built a product and we did internal alpha testing. It was fun. We played with it for like a month, and we did our own feedback and got our own data and tweaked and iterated it a couple times before we ever released a product. Empirical data, go get as much, what are our page metrics? What's our exit rate? What pages are they going to? What kind of content do people really like to see? You can get that out of something like Google Analytics, Adobe Omniture. You could get it from Piwik. So plenty of empirical data. Splunk. Hackathon. Hackathons are the ultimate agile if you think about it. Give somebody a challenge, have them rally around that challenge, and within 24 to 48 hours, they're presenting you back something that's killer innovation. Let them hackathon. Let them figure it out. Give them some wings and let them fly. Recent historical use and user surveys. Like, do we have anything that says that somebody's used a product similar to this? Microsoft learned a lot when they built Word. Only 17% of Microsoft Word's used on a daily basis. And believe it or not, over 35% of Microsoft Word is rarely used 1% of the time. I think they learned something pretty solid there, is that we could have clipped that 35%, and history shows it now. So if you were to go build a word processing program, you'd try and find out what 35% is rarely used that Microsoft Word built. An on-site dev session, flash mob programming. You could probably go out and Google. There's actually a Google video out there where a group of developers, product owner, user experience went to, I think it was like Eyeglass Superstore or something, and created an application on site, had users give feedback, and then told the users, come back in a couple hours and we'll have that feedback changed and we want to see what you think about it. What a novel concept. I can't imagine too many people were trying that, because it's, and that was done like 5-6 years ago. But, you know, it takes a lot of maturity to be able to go do something like that. And then random use case test. That was kind of interesting. Just like I said with my experience when I went into Amazon Workshop, we had a 4.5-star rated app. We thought we were on top of the world, and they did some random use cases internally with their staff, and they came back and they said, this is what we learned from it. But now we want to do some use cases with you guys, the ones that built the product. And they put us through some challenges, and it wasn't easy. And we learned a lot about our own product, and we all quickly put our heads together and said, we got a lot of work to do when we get back to the shop. All right. So now some approaches. We know what the maturity is like. We know the nomenclature for the type of visual effort that it takes. So love Google. Google's very revolutionary, and they perfected this design sprint. I like it a lot. It's something to inject. 5-day process. It answers key business critical questions. Design, prototype, test with customers. It gets feedback. Everyone's involved. Development's involved. Testers are involved. First, they unpack the idea. They do a lot of discovery. They find out what the users want. They gather that data. They sketch it. Remember that fidelity, that sketch. They sketch it out real quick. They decide through sketches what the best approach is. Then they go quickly prototype it. They don't spend months prototyping this thing. It's a day. They prototype what they need in a small form in a day. And then they test it. They ensure that, hey, cool, this is what we want before we really start working and collaborating as a development team. And they don't hand it off. They work on this together. They sit side by side, shoulder to shoulder, and they perfect these approaches. Everyone's involved. There's only 1 week. And believe it or not, the developer's confidence is pretty high because they've been part of this process, part of this ideation process. As a matter of fact, they know a lot more about it, so they can develop it a lot quicker. Here's one that I worked with when I was back in the transformation at CBS Interactive, Rolling Wave. It's very similar to the design sprint. UX injects itself into the first half of the sprint. They collaborate. They start nailing through this together. If you got a 2-week sprint, they spend a week working together. And then development starts the first half of the next sprint with UX, again, collaborating, doing some sandbox reviews, tweaking some things. And then they move into test and review it. And at the end, they deliver something and they keep repeating this. And you keep this going, developing feature after feature. You know, eventually you have a product. This is a really good approach. Segmented swarm, again, you could put the Google design sprint right at the beginning of this. First week is design, discovery, UX, dev collaboration. There's your design sprint. Google's method works pretty well. This is a 3-week sprint. Keep that in mind. The second week is dev focused. Let's build this, UX review, fine tune. And then third week is almost like a code freeze. Of course, every business, it seems, has a constraint of, we can't stop coding. We can't just shift and spend a week testing this. Think about the quality that you're getting. Think about your method and approach. You are meeting end user needs. You are preventing rework, and you actually are trying to create an adopted, highly sticky product that's going to be top notch, world class. So this is viable. I mean, it's a good approach. You deliver a solid quality product at the end. I worked with one team. That's a lie. I've worked with over 60 or 70 teams, but I've had one team that was ultra high performing, and they were an all for one for all team. UX, QA, front end development, back end development, operations resource. Basically, they were unimpeded. You could give them a problem and say, I want a fantasy roster for baseball, and I want to be able to choose 3 pitchers, 2 first basemen, yada, yada, yada. And they immediately started sketching it out on a whiteboard. The team immediately starts getting to work with a blank canvas. Devs started thinking about the possibilities. They were contributing to the ideation process. QA was already thinking, how will this work? And they generally, most places, you think QA a lot of times comes from the call center, or QA comes from, you have some engineers there, but a lot of your QA, they have some sort of project or product expertise. They know the product really, really well. I mean, their job's to break the thing. The team immediately gets to work. By the end of the sprint, they have a working increment. You've given them nothing more than a problem to solve. And they're like a black ops team. They went renegade, came back, and they're like, check it out. Look at what we have. Highly trusted, super mature to run this approach. This is one that I like when your team's got like that middle level maturity. Your user experience kind of sits a little bit in their own little silo, and they're not really injected with the team. Well, that's great. Let's use Kanban and give them a UX feeds dev system. It's done when it's ready to pull, just like any Kanban system. You move as fast as its slowest constraint. You could see the movement. You could see the flow. Highly visible. Everybody could look at this team's Kanban board and see where they're at. There's a little bit of collaboration loss because user experience isn't injected into the team, but they build in mechanisms, and you'll see why in a second. Everyone has insight into this board, the priorities, and can contribute. So here's an example of that board. There's your teams down below, and you can see where your team stuff is on the board in flight at all times. So where do they build feedback in? With a feedback column. There's feedback. So team 2 then would be brought in. Hey, look, this is what we thought about. This is what we're designing. What do you guys think? Is this doable? And if yes, they're prototyping. If no, they're probably running it back through and making some tweaks to design again, bouncing it back. And then when they get to the point of testing, they're probably bringing the team back in again saying, hey, look, team, this is where we're at. We want you to use it. We want you to see. We want you to try our prototype out. And then the team's going, cool, we know a lot about this. And once it hits the done column, team 2 then, for their work, their product, you go, we're going to build user stories now, and we're going to start piping it into team 2's Scrum structure. And then, of course, there's lean UX. I won't get too much into the lean UX because there's a whole book written on this. And you could see that there's a system that's put down. There's a very good graphic illustration right there. And you could follow that. And it's not much different than the approaches that I showed you. So to summarize, know your visual effort. Know how deep you need to go in visual detail. And a lot of it's constrained on your maturity, so understand the extent of the maturity. And if anybody on here is listening, we're change agents. I think our job is to be change agents. So there's a healthy challenge. Come back and challenge and say, do we really need a high fidelity prototype? Can we start collaborating sooner? Find ways to get stuff moved more to the front end and more into the infancy area of where we start collaborating instead of where we're very certain. Understand the team chemistry and interpersonal aptitude. That's truly important. Determine your tooling. There are a ton of tools out there, and some are budgetary constraints. Others are free. Heidi mentioned a cool tool before we started here, Scrum Do. But there are a lot out there. There's Balsamiq, there's InVision, there's Sketch 3, Adobe XD. I'll get in. We'll share the slides, and I have a bunch of tools that you could look at. Find an approach to start with. I gave you a handful of them. The only one that I didn't give you and I cut out of this slide is the do all the user experience up front. That's basically only when your development team is just Agile. User experience is Agile in their own world, but you're taking a step back and creating a waterfall. If your team isn't that mature, then you have a lot of work to do with maturity to get into really injecting user experience into an Agile approach. Try something, inspect it and adapt it. It's the backbone for what we do. It's the pillars of Agile: inspection and adapt, and being able to adapt, and that transparency. Make your policies explicit. Say, this is what we're going to try. We're going to give it a try, and we're going to see what works, and we're going to keep iterating from there. So real quick, tool recommendations: wireframing, sketching, low fidelity mocks, and prototypes. You can use a whiteboard or a napkin. Look how low tech that is. Paper, Sketchbook Pro, OmniGraffle, Axure, Visio, InDesign, Balsamiq. These are all real quick things that you could use to get very low effort into what you need to start collaborating. Some other tool recommendations for end-to-end high fidelity mocks and prototypes: Adobe XD, Sketch 3, Photoshop, and Vision. Data and analytics, I touched on that. Empirical data, that's important. There's some free hookups out there, and then there's some paid enterprise hookups: Piwik, Omniture, Splunk, Google Analytics. See what your page level tracking's telling you. A/B testing and click mouse tracking. This is huge. People don't realize how much you could do. Heat meters, see how far someone scrolls down a page, see what they're clicking on, see what call to actions are working, what call to actions aren't working. And just like the old psychology, red stop sign thing, or red means bad. There are colors that drive user behavior, and you've got to experiment and test those color palettes. So you could use Optimizely or ClickTail. Anyway, I've thrown a whole bunch of information at you guys. I'm open.
Thank you, Jeff.
So, Jeff, we have some great questions from our audience. So I'll start with the ones that were voted on the most. So this one is, you understand the impact UX can have. How do you convince folks who don't believe and or understand the positive impact focusing on UX can have?
Well, it goes back to maturity. Where I'm at now, the organization I'm at now, is at the beginning stages of delving into what user experience is. You'll find a lot of lean startups right out of the chute. That's their first thing. The reason why they're breaking onto the scene is because they found a niche. They could reach an end user, and that user experience is important because they need to get to them. But like the energy company that I went to train at, who would think energy needs user experience? But people are going, I want to pay my bills easier. And they're just starting to understand through timely evolution practices of, our users aren't liking this. Our call center volumes are going up. And generally, you got to staff call centers, and that costs money, right? So you could articulate money, driving down call center costs, increasing customer happiness, the Kano model, exciters, delighters. And ultimately, if it's a cultural problem in the organization, one of the things that I like to do is go, let's experiment a little bit. We don't have to do it across the whole entire organization, but just give me a petri dish to work with. Let's build this model, and let's see where we can validate our user experience assumptions by injecting it into our process.
Okay. So the next one is, what is the relationship between the product owner and the designer? How do they balance who owns the product?
Yeah. So I remember my old SVP saying, this is the tail wagging the dog. That was his favorite saying, right? So we have a thing here, and they explicitly say, like, the product owner is the CEO. The Scrum Master is like the COO. They're in charge of the operations division, and the tech lead is in charge of like the development and excellence, right? The ROI comes at the hands of the product owner. However, the product owner a lot of times can be type A. I want this. I don't care. It's a symbiotic balance, and we as a Scrum Master should have enough soft skills to be able to help negotiate and understand what that balance is. It really is, because user experience, if they're doing their job right and they're getting end user feedback, they're working with the marketing division, they're working with the call centers, they're looking at empirical data, they should be crafting the right approach to begin with. product, however, needs to determine, how do we monetize that approach? How do we get the most value out of this? And a lot of times you'll find user experience wants to deliver everything, or they want to deliver the Jetsons right away. So the product owner wants to dial them back to MVP, right? And we as Agilists or Scrum Masters, like if I were to put my Scrum Master hat on, I have to convince the user experience team, we will get to your Jetsons approach, but we need to have a roadmap to do it. It's not going to happen overnight. So I kind of give them the creative discretion and freedom to go crazy. That's how you develop innovation, collaborate like crazy. But we definitely have to have a good symbiotic balance between those two and not let any one overrule the other. But at the end of the day, the tiebreaker goes to the PO. They got to make the business decisions. And we got to also understand, okay, you made this decision. There's responsibility and accountability that comes with the decision if we defect from empirical data, user feedback, all the good things that help build that environment. So we just got to be ready for any repercussions that might come down the path too if we make a bad decision. And then when that decision's made, we can't hang that person out to dry. We have to say, we're all on board together. Whether we agree with the decision or not, that's what best high-performing teams do. We're going to take this loss as a team if we have to. But with great risk come great rewards. So you never know. You may have a real great reward, make the company a ton of money, and you all look like heroes. But that's what being part of a team is all about.
That's a terrific answer, Jeff. The next one is, how do we go from thinking user experience is a good idea to actual practices that help reduce the feedback loop to ensure UX isn't just an internal opinion?
Well, you got to back it with something, metrics. When you're talking executives and you're talking VPs, and I'm not sure how many are on here, they don't want to hear opinions. They don't want a bunch of belly aching. If you come to them and say, here's what studies, and sometimes you'll even have a tough time breaking through then because there's a cost associated with it. Time investment, resource investment. And that's where I go back to the Petri dish thing. Good. We can't hire 6 user experience designers. But we could use some of the resources we already have. We could hire 1 user experience designer. We could start to validate and prove this model, and hopefully that starts to move the needle a little bit. I mean, there's no real silver bullet to that answer. If somebody doesn't believe, you gotta find ways to convince them, and it usually comes at metrics or showing that someone else. I mean, Google's on top of the world, and they're doing it. They're using this design sprint. It's working,
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So do you recommend a designer being embedded on a Scrum team?
Yes and no. Yeah, you see how quickly I jumped at the yes, because the best experiment I've ever had, we had a designer in on a team. The practicality and reality of if you got 15 teams, you're going to have 15 user experience designers, slim and none, right? So if that's the case, say I have 16 teams, I would lobby to have 8 user experience designers. And I think pragmatically and through my project management background and understanding logistically how to do this, I could split time effectively between those 8 user experience designers and 16 teams.
It's 12 o'clock.
To still make this work.
Okay, I think that's it.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much, Jeff. This was really informative. And thank you for everyone for submitting your questions. Great questions this time.
Yes, they were awesome questions. Thank you so much. So this will be posted on coachingagilejourneys.com in a few days, and we look forward to seeing you in 2018. We've got so many more amazing plans coming for you, so stay tuned on our website. Thanks everyone for joining.
Great team right here. You'll have fun.
Awesome. See you guys in 2018.
See ya.
Thanks, Jeff. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome stuff.
Bye, everybody.